significant questions to ask, such as around, does repeated Bryce questioning cause priming, for example?
I think I wouldn't go so far as to say it cast doubt, and again, I don't know if that's his particular view or not. But I think it did bring into focus that the Bryce methodology does itself need further validation.
Sure.
I think it's true to say that it's been accepted somewhat blindly. It hasn't been critically examined. It might be there might be room for improvement within Bryce.
Sure.
So I think there is a concern that we don't fully know what Bryce is eliciting, and whether it's the right way of eliciting whatever it's eliciting.
Sure.
So I think the easiest way to put it, the simplest way to put it, is that Bryce is one extreme, and NAT5 is probably the other extreme, and somewhere in between is. But the problem is it's such a vast gulf.
Well, indeed, yeah, and if my memory serves me correctly, we're talking about on average about 1 in 19,000 with NAT5, and approximately 1 in 600 for Bryce.
That's it. Yeah.
So that's the gulf that you're.
I mean, one way that we are looking at the gulf is there's the DREAMY study, and I'm one of the PIs for that. And again, that was taking forward a recommendation within NAT5, focusing on the caesarean section group, a 1 in 670, 1 in 600, which is very close to the Bryce.
Yeah.
So the question we're asking is, if we looked at post-caesarean section women, general anaesthesia caesarean section, and we administer them a Bryce, do we still get the 1 in 600 consistent with everyone else? Or is that are the relative proportions maintained, so we actually get to 1 in 20 with a Bryce and 1 in 600 with spontaneous?
Sure.
That would be particularly interesting, because that would also tease out some issues around Bryce.
Sure.
You can imagine where it falls. If it's 1 in 600 and 1 in 600, then why is it equivalent in the caesarean section women but not in others, etc., etc. So let's wait and see on that one.
Just to be clear, for the sake of the audience, as the lead investigator for the NAT5 project, you would be unhappy if the average anaesthetist interpreted the data as indicating that the actual incidence of accidental awareness under anaesthesia was nearer 1 in 19,000.
Well, let me clarify. Actually, I've been consistent in this. The number, the numerical incidence, doesn't matter at all, whether it's 1 in 19,000, 1 in 600, whatever, because both those numbers are uncommon. What I would say, I'd be unhappy if the average anaesthetist, practicing anaesthetist, interpreted 1 in 19,000 or 1 in 600 as indicating a trivial problem.
Yeah.
I think that's
that is the problem, isn't it?
So regardless of incidence, numerical incidence, it's important not to use that incidence to trivialise the problem, whatever that incidence is.
Sure.
That's the point that I would.
But I think that the reason why the numbers are important is that the average anaesthetist might not quite get to 1 in 19, might not get to 19,000 general anaesthetics, but they certainly will get to 1 in 600.
But the way to disregard, as it were, to underplay this numerical, you could say obsession, and the media had it, and you're questioning on it, etc. To get away from that, the incidence 1 in 19,000, that sort of ballpark, is the same as other very significant things that happen in anaesthesia, like never events, which are not trivial. So I think the message is that even if the true, whatever that means, is discovered to be 1 in 19,000, I'd be sitting here and saying, fine, but that's still not a trivial problem, because it's the same as the never events, etc., etc.
Fine. Okay. I want to move on now to the isolated forearm technique and other issues. So, what evidence do you have that spontaneous movements don't occur with the isolated forearm technique?
Well, the only evidence I have is what's been published. people aren't publishing as their focus on that aspect. They're publishing on other aspects. I mean, perhaps at this stage it may be useful to summarise what my view of the isolated forearm actually is, to put some context to the discussion. So what I believe, and that belief is formed through the analysis of the literature and personal experiences, but obviously personal experiences being minimal, as you previously indicated, we experience so little, but looking at the picture overall, that there are dose-dependent effects on the brain with anaesthetic drugs that lead us from a state of being fully awake to being deeply unconscious and unresponsive. And between those, are states as yet ill-defined that occur in a dose-dependent way. And what I think the isolated forearm technique is a unique way of dissecting out what those states could be. Because it's, and you've said words similar to this, it's the only way that we have of accessing behaviour in an otherwise paralysed patient in that trajectory. And what I think is that there are several isolated forearm responses that are possible. So, for example, when you yourself underwent it, you were fully awake and you exhibited the full range of behaviours and movements that you are sitting here in the chair today. And that's one level, and you can imagine patients, even with very small doses of anaesthetic, being at that sort of level with that full range of responses. So when I say they don't occur, well, of course they can occur if they don't get very much anaesthetic. And then at the other extreme are patients who are simply unresponsive and isolated. So they're not all responding. That's because they're way down here. The point about the in-between states, and this is what I'm focusing on, is that there is demonstrably this group of patients that's reported with no spontaneous sort of alerting movements, as I call it, but they've retained the capacity to respond to direct command. Some of them have even retained the capacity to respond to conditional choice questioning. Not all. And so we do see that gradation between the types of responses. Now, our interpretation of that is up to us, as it were. We can either say, well, it's all the same, and they're all awake in a binary sort of approach. They're all awake or they're all asleep. Or we can say, well, hang on a moment. This pattern of responses, this behaviour, is different from Michael Wang, who had nothing. And it's clearly different from those who are not responding at all. It's unique, and it warrants a separate interpretation. And that's fundamentally where this idea of dysanaesthesia came from. So it's not saying that everyone in IFT is in one category or another. It's to say it's dissected out a subcategory.
And I think we both agreed that actually there's not a lot of difference between our positions. My difficulty is with a single title of dysanaesthesia for what I consider to be a range of states. And indeed, many years ago, I put forward a classification at one of the MAA meetings from about 1 to 5 in terms of the type of response you get from the isolated forearm.
That's right.
So that at the very minimum for me, there are probably four or five different subtypes of response.
And that's sort of consistent. If you recall the article that we published by way of debate coming out of the last MAA meeting, I drew this sort of colour diagram going from sort of red being awake to blue being deeply anaesthetised, with dysanaesthesia spanning a range of colours in the sort of zone in between. So it wasn't fixed to one colour or one shade. That there is that clear gradation, and it's clearly, as we learn more about that period in between, it's clearly a dynamic state. It's dose dependent. It's at that very sort of subtle range in between two stable states, you can say. And so it's going to span a lot of